talking about the end. Now, in reality, there is no end when it comes to things, but there are ends of things. And a lot of people talk about the end of this world. Some people think that in 2028 that there's this big asteroid that's coming by, and it's not gonna hit the Earth. It's gonna be really close, but just the dust of it is gonna darken the sky, and it'll kill everything on the Earth. And others think that there's going to be a pandemic that's going to wipe out everybody, similar to what we had in 1918. There was more people died of influenza than died in the First World War, and the First World War had a high casualty rate. And others think that solar storms will destroy us, that we've had a number of things that have happened. In 1859, solar storms caused the telegraph wires to short out in the U.S. and Europe. In 1989, and I didn't know this, a solar storm knocked out all the power in Quebec, Canada. And then, of course, some people think that, well, global warming is going to cause all kinds of greenhouse gases, and the Earth climate's going to become volatile and temperatures rise. And in fact, I saw something the other day on Drudge Report. It said that they brought up an interview they did about the year 2000, and they said in 2008 that half of New York would be underwater. So, yeah, they missed that one. But you just have to have faith. Hang in there. And of course, a lot of people have read different prophetical revelations and other things where they think that some of those things is nuclear war happening, that it's gonna be the end of the earth and all kinds of things like that. There's even some gross misinterpretations. I think probably one of the most absurd is a university, Michigan State University, had a class entitled Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse. Now, I've heard the people talk about that. I don't know what that is, but it seems to be pretty popular. But maybe that one's not quite as serious. I don't know how serious people are about it, but it's certainly people talking about it. There's a lot of interesting theories, but in 2 Peter, it tells us how it all ends, and we'll get to that in a little bit. There's a lot of theologians in that felt that during the Cold War that nuclear war that one or the other side would send the first one, and the rest through retaliatory and hundreds of nuke heads that we'd wipe out the population of the earth. So, but now I do believe in global warming. Not man-made, but God-made. In fact, we read it in 2 Peter in chapter 3. And chapter 3 in verse 9 and 10. It says, the Lord is not slack concerning his promises, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. We got global warming coming. It's a future event. Now, some people read that and they don't balance that with other scriptures, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the earth is just going to be a fireball, like a lot of the pictures you see. A correlating chapter is Isaiah 24, where it talks about the earth being shaken and being turned upside down, all these things, but then at the end of the verse it says, and few men left, and other verses that go along with that. It is the events that are coming, not that far off, are they're spoken about in numerous places in the scriptures, referred to as the great and terrible day of the Lord, Armageddon, things of that nature. It's all the same event. It's when Jesus returns. Armageddon, we're going to go into some verses in the Gospels where Jesus talks about that. The disciples ask the question, and it gives us a sign of when that's going to come close. Basically, it's when the fig tree and other trees, it says, are putting out their green shoots. But anyway, we have a historical data book that we can look at and see that these things do happen. We have evidence of prophecies of things that have happened. Back in the first verse of chapter 3, it says, "Beloved, I now write to you this second epistle, in both of which I stir up your pure minds by way of a reminder, that you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets, and the commandment to us, the apostles and the Lord Savior." So what he's saying here when he talks about these things, and he goes on and tells them how that, things have been going on since creation, and how that God fulfilled things through the flood and different things, that God brought judgment on people. God, when he says he's going to do something, he does it. But he's faithful to save those who have faith in him, just as he did in the ark. But what Peter's saying here in this first verse is that you may be mindful of the words that were spoken before by the holy prophets. Let's see, doesn't it always say? Well, it says, which stir up your pure minds by way of remembering. In other words, Peter is saying that he wants us to think. He wants us to remember what the scripture tells us, what the prophets of old have told us. He wants us to not just, to see that when God predicted things, that when Israel would go astray, that he would bring judgment on them, and that they would, reap the results of their going astray. He wants us to remember that. He does want us to think about the end of the world, but I think we need to keep it in perspective. And let me go ahead and read 1 through 8. Or I'll go ahead and read 3 to the end of the chapter. "Knowing this first, that the scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For if they willingly forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water." And do you know that there are 270 some cultures that have a record of a flood? The evidence shows that there's something to that story, because there's no other story that's so prolific within cultures that are non-Christian, just old cultures, whether it's paganistic or whatever. They got it from someplace. Being flooded with water, but the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, and reserved by fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. That's not given to us as a key to prophecy. That's given us to tell us it doesn't matter with God. A day, 1,000 years, we look at history and we think, oh, where is he? Is he coming back? but, he's only been gone, Jesus has only been gone 2 days. He'll be back tomorrow. And it's about midnight right now. But anyway, people will scoff, so you've got a lot of people that think that he's not coming back. And you've got a lot of people today, I believe, that are fear mongers, I guess is the word. Doomsday preppers are some people that are, I'm not saying it's wrong to prepare, but some people just live, I'm talking about Christians that just live in paranoia. It engulfs them, and it sells big in religion. You can write stories about, what's going to happen, in the future around the bend, and it sells. I mean, but there are a lot of Christians that they're piling up ammunition, they're piling up freeze-dried food, and they're getting off the grid, and all these kinds of things, and these are the most important things to them, it seems like. And I don't believe that's the case. I don't think that's the most important thing. I don't see anywhere where Jesus or God told us that we're to do that. In fact, very often he tells people to get rid of their stuff so they can trust him even more. When he sent out the disciples, he told them not to take stuff with them because God provide for him. David said he'd never seen the righteous forsaken. But there's a commercial that was on TV. It said in the commercial, it says, Jesus is coming soon, perhaps tomorrow. And it says, for $10, you can send for a video, and it'll explain the second coming of Jesus. But you have to wait 6 weeks for the delivery. So, he might come tomorrow, but you got to get that video. You got to watch it. I don't have to worry about my brother watching this, but I've got a brother that is he's just obsessed with this stuff. Just what the government is doing and all that. And I told him, I says, you need to be worried about giving people the gospel. It's better to save their soul than to, save your hide, I guess. But it just, some people are so overtaken with that they totally lose the whole meaning of why we're here and what's important and where we put our faith. I would like to go through prophecies. Jesus made some statements, and the disciples asked him a couple questions, and it's recorded in 3 different Gospels. The first one is in Luke 21. And verses 5 and 6 we'll start out with. It says, then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned, and how beautiful the stones and donations, he said, these things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another, and shall not be thrown down. Now this is talking about the destruction of the temple. He's talking about what's going to happen in 70 AD. When the temple is completely torn down. In fact, all of the walls of Jerusalem are tore down except the western wall, which is the one that is existing today. And I believe there were 3 columns that they left also. But that's what Jesus is saying here, that these stones are all going to be taken down. Then in verse 7 he says, and they ask him, saying, Teacher, when will these things be? And what will be and what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? Well, they're asking 2 different questions, and probably the Matthew one explains it a little better. But so in each of these, he immediately comes back with a statement. He doesn't tell them, well, you need to put stuff up and get ready and things like that. His warnings are of a spiritual content. And he says, in verse 8, he says, "Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time has drawn near. Therefore do not for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time has drawn near. Therefore do not go after them." So, that's his first statement, is take heed, beware, don't get sucked in by the hype and all that. And I don't think it's much different today. People are selling, the fear in that. And Jesus is telling them that they need to beware. Verses 9 through 13 says, "But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end will not come immediately." Then he said, "Nations will rise against nations, kingdom against kingdoms, and there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilence, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering up into the synagogues and to prisons, and you will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake." And let me read one more verse. "But it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony." Well, everything that they mentioned there, now a lot of people are saying, well, that's all future. But everything that happened there, Jerusalem during Jesus' time was in a time of peace. There was virtually no wars going on, but the revolt started a number of years after that. By 70 A.D., Rome had already come down, and they'd been fighting with I forget the term they gave them, but the Jewish people that were rebelling against Rome, and they actually had some pretty good victories. And there was a few years that they succeeded against fighting against Rome. But this is what happened to the disciples. But what he's saying is there will be wars and rumors of wars, and I think there is a certain application to the time before he comes. But I don't. We need to be careful about getting caught up into the detail of it all, because he's saying these all things are going to pass. Don't worry about it. But the important thing here, I think in verse 7 is, "But it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony." We can use the things that happen in the world to tell people that, God can be with you. You can have faith in him. It may not be easy, but, we win in the end. So in verse 20 through 24, he goes on and he tells, before this, he tells them how that they'll be persecuted and those kinds of things. But in verse 20, he says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon its people. They will fall by the edge of the sword." Basically, the Jews lose their land in the end, and they don't regain it till in verse 24, "For they will fall by the edge of the sword, be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the end." Now, this desolation that it's talking about is talking about a specific time. It's talking about when the Rome came down, I've got, when we get into the Mark one here, I'll talk about that a little bit. But then in verse 25 it says, "And there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the seas and waves roaring, men's hearts failing for from the fear of the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, from the power of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud of glory with great glory. Now, I really believe that says men's hearts failing are not God's people. That's the people that are afraid. They're afraid of what's coming on the earth. And I think that's already started. People are really afraid. I mean, all over. It's let's go over to Mark. And chapter 13. We'll read the first 3 verses. This is a repeat. I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead and read this. Mark chapter 13, 1 through 3, it says, Then as he went out of the temple, and one of the disciples said to him, Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. And Jesus answered and said to him, Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Here again, he's talking about this coming destruction of Israel and of Jerusalem and the temple. And, I think these things are in God's plan. There is a reason why the temple was destroyed down in God's plan, I believe. This may be speculation, but, from that point on, and this is borne out in other prophecies, there's no more sacrifices at the temple, because Israel could not make sacrifices unless they come to the temple. The 3 feasts that the males were to appear every year. There is no feast days. I'm sorry, some folks want to latch onto that, but there are no feast days without sacrifices. And without those three feasts and those sacrifices that go along with it, you don't have a feast day. You have a gathering, a convocation, I guess, but that's not the description of those feasts as they were given in Exodus and Deuteronomy and that. I want to go to Daniel and chapter 9. I was supposed to do that earlier, according to their outline I gave them. Daniel chapter 9. Now, there is something about prophecy that people get lost in the detail. I believe one of the things you have to do with prophecy, if you have to find events that you know are evident. For instance, there's a lot of events that happen through history that are recorded in the scriptures. When Jesus died on the cross, that's a big event, and there are things about that talks about that. The destruction of the temple, that's a big event, and it talks about that in prophecy, that those things will happen, and it does here in Daniel chapter 9 and verses let's go to 24. And I could go back. I've actually read a little bit earlier in the chapter, but this is the 70 weeks prophecy. But you can go in here and just read 24 and 25 and just observe what it's saying, and you know what it's talking about. They're some of the easiest ones to understand, but it amazes me. They take chapter 9 and they come up with this whole secret rapture idea on that, and it's just not in the Bible. In fact, I know a lot of Protestant believe it, but the idea came from a Catholic priest or scholar, and it's not that long ago. But anyway, let's just read those 2 verses and see if you can identify some of the things in these 2 verses. Forget about the 70 weeks right now, but see if you can identify when this happens. 70 weeks are determined for your people, for your holy city, to find the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision of prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Okay, when is to make an end of sins? When is the end of sins? When do you think in history, the end of sins was fulfilled when Jesus died on the cross. To me, this is just simple as pie. To make reconciliation for iniquity. Jesus paid the price on the cross for the sins of mankind. And to anoint the most holy, well, we know that's got to be Jesus. Verse 25 says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." Now, okay, we may wonder about the weeks, and the weeks is not that hard to figure out, but he's saying from going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem. Well, if you've read Nehemiah and Ezra, when Israel was in Babylon, and they got permission to go up there and start restoring Jerusalem, that's what it's talking about here. In verse 24, I think anybody that hasn't read much can identify it. When you read 25, if you read some of that history, you can immediately understand that when that edict was, that they were allowed to go and start rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. And it says, until the Messiah the Prince. Well, we know who the Messiah is. At least the Christians do. And it shall be 7 and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall, and even in troublesome times. And the troublesome times is when they went up there, they had a lot of trouble. They had to build with one hand and hold a spear in the other hand. It wasn't easy. And after 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people and the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and sanctuary. Okay, the Messiah is cut off. When was the Messiah cut off? When he was crucified on the cross. And it says, and the people and the prince who is to come, not talking about Jesus there, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end of it shall be with a flood. Till the end of the war, desolations are determined. Okay, I think I'll go ahead. Well, let me read a little farther down here. Let me go back to I guess I am back there. Mark chapter 1 through 3 we read. Verse 4 says, they ask these two questions. Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the signs when all things will be fulfilled? They wanted to know two different things. When this is going to happen, and he's talking about the tearing it down, and when the side of all things will be fulfilled. Now, if you read in Matthew, it tells us that he's talking about when Jesus will return. Okay, and here again, his first statement to them is, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name and saying, I am he. And he goes on and tells them in verse 8, for nation shall rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, there be earthquakes, etc. And it's saying this is the beginning of sorrows. Well, those things happen, and then in verse 10 it says that the gospel must first be preached to all the nations. Now, I frankly believe the gospel has been preached to all nations. I think it's happened multiple times. The gospel has been to China for hundreds of years. Thomas went to India. In fact, some people think, well, there's not many Christians in China, but there are a lot. The young Chinese guy that Kenny Stockton, we talked to him, and he said there's lots of churches in China, but they're more underground. They can't be open. They won't let them put steeples up and those kinds of things, but they're actually more open than they have been in years gone by. But anyway, verse 14 talks about, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not to be, where it ought not, let the reader understand. And it says this in several places, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the housetops not go into the house, nor enter into anything out of the house. And not let them go into the field, not go back to get his clothes, but woe unto them who are pregnant and that. And basically it's giving instructions to those who are in Judea that they need to get out. Now, it has been said that the Christians got out of Jerusalem. You remember what the hard times they had there. Paul took up offerings to the people in Jerusalem and that those were dire circumstances. But I just got a short history here. I'll try to make it short of what actually happened during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Actually, when this happened, it was Titus was the general who was the future emperor that was leading the army, and the different, there were 3 legions that they led down here. But the sacking of the city was, it's significant because it's when the second temple was torn down. The first one was built, of course, during Solomon's time. The second one was built when the Jews were allowed to return, and then Herod, about 50 years before this, built a lot of addition onto it. And Titus didn't want to tear it down, but a number of circumstances happened, and it did happen. Let me just read a couple excerpts out of here. After several failed attempts to breach and scale the walls, this is after the Romans had come down and they'd attacked. The Romans finally launched a secret attack, overwhelming the sleeping zealots and taking the fortress, overlooked the temple compound, and fortress provided a perfect point from which to attack the temple itself. Battering rams made little progress, but the fighting eventually set the walls on fire, and a Roman soldier threw a burning stick into one of the temple walls, destroying the temple. Destroying the temple was not among Titus's goal, possibly because in a large part of the massive extension that Herod the Great made decades later, he'd wanted to seize and transform it dedicate it into a Roman pantheon of worshiping other gods. But anyway, the fire spread quickly, and they used Josephus, the historian. We have the works of Josephus. The Romans used Josephus as a mediator, and that didn't work out real well. Josephus was actually shot with an arrow at that time, but then he was able to witness all of it firsthand. That's why we have a lot of record of what actually happened. Josephus acted as a mediator for the Romans, and when negotiations failed, witnessed the siege and the aftermath, and this is what he wrote. Now, as soon as the army had no more people to slay or to plunder, because there remained none to be objects of their fury. I mean, they were really mad because of the rebellion of these people, for they would not have spared any had there remained any other work to be done. Titus gave orders that they should now demolish the entire city and temple, but should leave as many of the towers standing as were in the great eminence. That is, and he lists the 3 columns that they left, and so much of the wall enclosed the city on the west side. That's the western wall. And then let me drop down, but for all the rest of the wall surrounding Jerusalem, so it was so thoroughly laid even unto the ground that those that dug it up to the foundation, that there was not left nothing to make those that came thither believe it. Jerusalem had been that it had even been inhabited. This is testimony, historical documents that shows what Jesus said was utterly fulfilled. the temple itself was just totally destroyed. All the walls were, and the city was burned, and the only thing left was the western wall of the city. This was the end which, this is Josephus' words, this was the end which Jerusalem came to by the madness of those that were for innovation, a city otherwise of great magnificence and mighty fame among all mankind, and truly very few view itself with such melancholy was a melancholy thing, for those places which are adorned with trees and pleasant gardens were now become desolate country every way, and its trees were all cut down. Nor could any foreigner have that had formerly seen Judea and the most beautiful suburbs of the city, and now saw it as a desert, but lament and mourn sadly as so great a change. So you understand why, and it goes on and says that Josephus' tally was that 1.1 million people were killed in that siege, and it was worse than anything you've seen on PBS, or it was just bodies piled on top of each other. Just they had to climb over them to continue to kill them. But I mean, it was a gruesome scene. But this is, that's why in Daniel, it talks about the desolation, the abomination of desolation. The temple was torn down and destroyed. It was, it was totally desolate. It was a beautiful place. It was like a park, beautiful area, had been built up, but it was a desert when they left. So this thing that happened, it's something it's good to understand, because you can understand. I mean, it should build your faith to see how these prophecies were fulfilled so utterly and completely. Okay, let's go back. Where was I? We're in Mark 13. Verse 14 I read, the temple was torn down. Verse 22, it says, for false Christ and false prophets will rise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed, see, I have told you these things beforehand. And then 24 through 26. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars in the, let's see, where was I? I touched a button I shouldn't have. And there will be sun, that's not where I was. Okay. For some reason, it jumped back over to, Rose is going to scold me after this for using my electronic device. I've learned to read her mind in some ways. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars of the heaven will fall, and the powers in the heavens shall be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great glory, and then he will see his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds and from the farthest parts of heaven. So in these verses here, and then in on through verse 31, he talks about the sign that is given. Now learn this parable from the fig tree, which is the branch has already become tender and put forth leaves. You know that summer is near. So you also, when you see the things happening, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. And I haven't heard anybody give me a good explanation. I don't know if that means the generation of the Gentiles or just what he means by that. But heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So the parable of the fig tree, I believe, began in 48 when Jerusalem as a nation, or Israel as a nation, took over the land, but I don't think it's there yet. It's forming, but it has not formed yet. And until they accept Jesus, they're not going to be God's people. But they will. There will be, as there always has been, a remnant that will recognize him for who he is, and it says, in whom they have pierced. So, this abomination of desolation is a real thing. The things coming are real things, but let's go back to 2 Peter. Not too much left here now. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 11 to the end of the chapter. He said, therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? He's not saying what to do is to arm yourself or whatever. He's saying, how should you be? How are you going to act? You should be in holy conduct, looking for the hastening of the coming of the day of the Lord. And that is the day of the Lord that talks about Scripture. It's not Sunday or even Sabbath. The day of the Lord is an awesome thing. It's coming. Because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. And I look for that every day. I long for it. And I think the prophecy where it talks about those under the altar, we're saying, Lord, come quickly, how long? And I think a lot of saints are feeling that. But, he's telling us we need to act like his children. And I believe that the evidence of us being ready is, like I said, not being prepared physically, but it's being prepared spiritually. We should be equipping ourselves with, or we should be having fruit that is evident of a tree that is that vine, that tree. The fruits of the Spirit should be evident in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. If you go back in Daniel and read the first part of the chapter there, Daniel's concern was not, what's going to happen in the future. That's not what he was asking. He was saying, well, this is what Moses said was going to happen, and it happened to us. And the people that were not repenting from the sins that they had committed. And that really concerned Daniel. He was concerned about the sins of his people and for their salvation. And I really believe that should be our greatest concerns too. We should be concerned about what we are and what we're doing, and about those who don't know him. That should be the emphasis, the thrust of where our daily walk should be in our ministry. Peter told us to think about these things and bring them into remembrance. God bless you.